Don't you worry, the clip's about to begin, but don't forget to subscribe. Or else, don't make me turn this website around.
All right, so we've got theist and atheist callers, but here was a question specifically for you. Robert in California, you're on with Mandisa. Thank you for waiting.
Hello.
Hey guys, thanks for taking my call. So I've known Matt for years. It's great to be on with you guys. Mandisa, I just heard about you from the Sunday show, and one of the things you mentioned is that you were influenced by the Black nationalist community. I'm an anthropologist. I actually work inside of an Egyptian museum. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on Black people in America kind of reclaiming ancient Egyptian culture as their own.
It's been interesting because throughout my childhood experience, I've seen a lot of Black folks do. I always connected more with the Black nationalists who did a more well-rounded educational approach to Black history and culture, and some of that included aspects of ancient African history and such. I think for the ancient Egyptian philosophy, I mean, it is more extensive than what the movies and the TV shows give credit to. Because oftentimes what you see when ancient Egypt is depicted, it is often a lot of white or, very fair-skinned folks. And while it is in the Mediterranean region near Greece and, and all of those other countries, there were many dark-skinned and many African Egyptians. And the dynasties, I mean, I remember taking some courses and learning some things as a kid, and that history it's a lot. I think there's a lot of beauty in it.
Yeah.
You have the Ankh, which is the symbol of life. You have the pyramids. You have all of those things that are, aesthetically pleasing, or they're very, very they're very nice to to adorn yourself with. And I do think it's very interesting, though, to see some folks in the Black community in particular take it and romanticize it as if it was just this perfect, this perfect history, and it wasn't. Basically, the pyramids are just huge
I think that might be like one of my problems.
Right. Yeah. If you look at ancient, the pyramids are just basically big tombs. Basically big gravestones, big grave markers.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they are. And if you look at some of the history, there was still a lot of, there was a lot of infighting. There was a lot of, there was a lot of good education that came from it. However, I don't think any ancient civilization should be romanticized, and that includes the Egyptian history, the dynasties and such, or any other, because the ancient Africans were people just like anyone else. But I think there is a difference in how, in how, the conquered were treated, as opposed to, once the transatlantic slave trade and the Islamic slave trade started taking place, where there was perpetual enslavement. But I think that part of that reclaiming comes from having been denied this history for so long. You have to remember that there is still a white lens on history that depicts, Africans and darker skinned people as being savages and evil. And there is absolutely I think this is history. This is important for all of us to learn and understand. Now, for some, like I said, ancient Egyptian history is kind of, I don't know, it's a bit taxing. I applaud anyone who kind of goes through, who specializes in it. I think it is very, very good, especially and if you want to talk about how Christianity was, basically took from ancient Egyptian history and the gods there. The story of Osiris. That was one that is one of the references that I think Christianity took from. So it is very, I think it is powerful for especially many Black folks who we have historically had that information denied us. It is important for us to have it, but it's also good to be objective. That's important as well.
I find myself in the opposite position. I'll let you get back to this, Robert, real quick. I just find myself in the opposite position in that I've not been denied access to anything about my history. I just legitimately don't give a fuck about what my ancestors did because I'm not beholden to their ideas, and I don't want to live in the past. But I think that if I had actually been denied information about that this might have driven something within me to seek out and understand more about my heritage and ancestors. Because for me, it's just like some French Huguenots trying to escape religious persecution went to Ireland and then came to the United States in the 17th century and formed one of the first churches that became the Southern Baptist Convention. So fuck all those guys. I come from a background of pastors. I don't care what they did.
Right. I mean, it's
well,
good
I
information.
think that's kind of a big part of it too. Is that not having to worry too much about your own personal history, because you could go back out there and research that. But within the Black community especially,
it's a bit more complicated.
I think that there's the denial there where it is. It's like you can say, French Huguenots, but if you're Black, it's like, no, slave.
Right, and
that was kind of a bullshit thing.
Right, you have to understand that if you it's ridiculous that there are some states who want to erase slavery from the history books, even though their ancestors benefited from it. Now you have to remember that there are many of the enslaved Africans had their names taken from them. And so as it was transactional, that's how people were treated.
Yeah.
So it is a bit harder.
Is Thomas a rather common surname in Africa? No, I don't think so.
Right.
And so, we know that your name has a different ancestry than you do because of slavery and other issues. I don't know the full history of your family, but it's bizarre. Like when I say that I don't care about mine, it's because I already knew. I know people who grieve the loss of a heritage and an inability to discover. I've had friends who were adopted with record sealed, and so they have like little to no hope of actually finding out even their near ancestors, let alone further down the line. Now, I'm not familiar, Robert, and I'm glad Mandisa talked about answering your question. This will show just how white and oblivious I am. When you asked about her opinion on the reclamation of Egyptian culture in the U.S., is there a movement that I'm oblivious to, which I'm assuming is true, of African Americans that are trying to what is the goal? It's not just about knowing one's heritage. It seems to be this reclamation of Egyptian heritage seems to be like, I'm going to go back to my ancestral roots. And is it the changing of dress? Is it the changing of hairstyles? Is it what are we actually talking about when we talk about reclaiming Egyptian?
It's a combination of all of that. Go ahead, Robert.
Well, I was going to say that you're going to have a much more personal view of this. Mine is going to be almost entirely academic, where I'm related to it, but I'm not directly a part of the Black community, so I'm just making observations.
Right. So these folks are what we commonly refer to as the Hoteps. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, Matt, and if you aren't, that's fine. I'll explain it to you somewhat.
I only know the name from Egyptian history. I didn't know that there was
and that is a greeting. Hotep is a greeting. It's like peace or hello, but there are some folks who have taken, the Egyptian style, if you will, and have applied it to what they think all Black folks in this country should be. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, quite a bit of it is rooted in misogyny, patriarchy, and all of those white supremacist ideals. But now it just has a Black spin on it. And it's very interesting that there are many, especially of the men, who will berate Black women for having, hair extensions, weaves, and such. But they tend to forget that the ancient Egyptians pioneered the use of wigs and hair extensions and enhancements. So, it's that part of history that, it's like that picking and choosing of what they think is, of what they think is ideal or what they think is right. And again, I don't fault anyone for wanting to learn more about it. And if it is something, because again, it is beautiful. There is a lot about that history and culture that is beautiful. And I think that if people like to sort of emulate that style, then I don't think there is anything wrong with that, as long as it isn't being appropriated like we see with other cultures. But I think when it is romanticized and you're only giving partial truths, then that's when it becomes a problem, as with anything.
Yeah, I think the only thing I heard.
Yeah, it's a bit of a fine line going down there, where I definitely get the idea behind it, especially if you're coming from a heritage that's been all but erased, where you're dealing with having a hard time finding, prominent historical people to relate to. But if you go, back 2,000, 3,000 years, then you've basically got the rulers of the planet, and it makes a really cool foundation, especially considering how interconnected that culture is to everybody else. But at the same time, that is very rife for, like you were saying, romanticization. So I'm trying to, walk down that line, saying like, yeah, this is good, but X, Y, and Z is technically not quite right, but it's close, and it's not exactly harming anybody yet, and it's hard to do, and it's hard to have these conversations sometimes. Because whenever I do have those kind of people around me, I'm usually in more of a customer service kind of capacity. So it isn't like I'm able to challenge people as much as I would like to sometimes, because I still have to put on the friendly, not offensive face to it.
Right. Yeah. Well, the thing is that there's going to have to be some leeway, because it's a process. It's a journey, just as many people kind of skipped their way out of religion and had to learn along the way. The same is true here, and probably on top of that. So, they're not just finding their way out of religion. They're also finding their way around learning more about Black history and their roots. And I consider myself fortunate that I had access to this information as a kid, and there are a lot of Black folks who didn't. So some of them are coming later in life.
I think the only thing I heard
I think one of my
that is, can Robert not hear me?
No, it might be some overlap. Go ahead.
Not
Matt.
until just now.
So I think the only thing I heard from Mandisa that I have any real problem with is this notion that there are some people who are trying to tell other Black people how they need to live their lives. Like, we should all be embracing our Egyptian roots, because if you're Black and you don't give a shit about that, you should be free to not give a shit about that.
Right. Yeah. And also, if you trace, the transatlantic slave trade, most of our ancestors were on the western coast of Africa. That's where most of the enslaved were kidnapped and put on the ships from. So that wouldn't even be historically accurate. But yes, you do have, the Black community is diverse. We have folks trying to tell, there is a lot of anti-Blackness within the Black community. And it is about time. Right? It's about time that we...
You're talking about, they were kidnapped from, Ghana and all the places on the West Coast. Not, we're not talking about pyramids here, as the tie to that culture. It's not like we invaded Egypt, and it's really strange to see some of that. But I don't know. And by the way, I'm in favor of people celebrating whatever the hell they want, whether it's their heritage or not. But Yeah. On that note, Robert, I gotta call it quits and move on to some other callers that are waiting. So, are you hanging up on me, or am I hanging up on you?
How about if I answer that with another question, Matt? So I've heard a lot about slavery and the Bible. I've got lots of quotes I can be giving you, some non sequiturs, and
I think he was teeing that up so that I could hang. I think he was teeing it up so that I could hang up on him, and I think he hung up. But I was ready to hang up on him just in case.
Hey, thanks for checking out this clip for The Line. While you're here, hit that like button, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and then share this with that bitter uncle of yours who loves talking about the good old days.